Greetings. What's up, guys? You got just me, Bella, today. Solo episode. And we're back. Already what happens when I do solo episodes is I start to sing. And fun fact, I had my own podcast for 3 years. And I was happy to put that thing to rest for a little bit to do a show with someone else. And all the memories are being brought back to me right now of my time running a solo show and how unhinged I would become when I did this all the time because I needed someone to bounce thoughts with back and forth. So anyways, if you experience my unhinged nature today, just know this is who I am, especially when there's no one else to make sure I don't go insane. Aside from that, welcome folks to the Out of Our Minds podcast. Lucky you today. Today is in effect a knowledge bomb all about productive disagreement and identity. How do those two relate? Oh my God, I'm going to blow your mind. That's how. They are so freaking related that honestly, I plan to write a book about it one day. Little tidbit. So anyways, guys, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to talk about this because especially piggybacking off of last week's conversation all about navigating darkness with light and kind of just thinking about how we approach the things that we experience in our life, we kind of need to have some practical chats about how that looks. And one thing that I am really, really, really into, and I spent several years researching and learning about, is productive disagreement, believe it or not, because in that time frame of 2020 to 2022, etc., to present day, basically, it was very clear that society was unable to have productive disagreements, and in fact that we were afraid to disagree. So that's kind of the background on why I know so much about this, and I became so passionate about it too because I found that by me being better equipped to handle disagreement, dissent, for me to be the one who was often the dissenter, it felt so good, and I saw my life change in the way that I interacted with disagreement and even just the way I interacted with ideas that I don't personally like or disagree with or whatever it may be. So this is going to be jam-packed with lots of super useful takeaways and tips that you can start integrating ASAP, but also I'm excited to share a bit of my philosophy, if you will, that I've learned from Eastern teachings, ancient philosophy from the East, Zen primarily, and how that has informed my view on identity and why I think, honestly, identity is like the core piece of a lot of these issues that we struggle with. And the idea is that the more that you can disentangle your identity from a lot of the traditional things that we attach our identity to, the better. And all of these things become easier when your identity is quite liberated. So I'm going to get into all of that. And of course, if you're enjoying the show, share it with a friend. This is a good one to pass around just because of all the practical tips I'm going to shove in here. And it's really going to help to just equip you feeling like you've got the mindset to do this and the actual toolbox to pull from. So yeah, if you're enjoying, share it with a friend. Make sure you give it a follow or subscribe depending on the platform you're listening to, and drop us a little review. It's been really cool to hear from you guys during each episode as it comes out week after week on your thoughts, how you're feeling about it, any extra comments you have. Definitely reach out, let us know. And especially one like this where I can see how there probably will be additional questions. Definitely reach out. And the last thing is I'm going to answer a question from a listener of ours. Shout out to Miles. I'll be addressing that towards the end. So great question. Excited about it. All right, let's do it.
What's up, guys? I'm Nikki.
I'm Bella. And this is the Out of Our Minds podcast, a playground for mystics and self-explorers to journey through the vast realms of the universe, cultural landscapes, and spiritual expansion.
Join us weekly as we dive into thought-provoking discussions that unveil the mysteries of existence and nurture the growth of our consciousness.
Identity. Let's start here because the topic and experience of identity is so layered and so important, and especially in the West has become something so important in our life that kind of has become problematic in a way. And it's really interesting to break it down and think about it from this alternative perspective, because the way I see identity and have experienced it myself is actually something that we don't need to be that tethered to. We don't need to be so focused in on being able to describe ourselves. And if you've been listening to the show, or if you know me, the way that I look at the world, the way that Nikki looks at the world as well, I'll just speak for myself in this instance, is that I find I have felt more liberation and more wholeness when I actually disentangle myself from various forms of identity, which I'll get into. And let's just give a good old definition to identity, just to get us all on the same page, okay? So identity refers to our sense of who we are as individuals and as members of social groups. It often refers to our sense of how others may perceive us and label us. Another definition here would be the fact of being who or what a person or thing is, right? It's kind of like a mix of our labels, the perception of ourselves, or the perception that others have of us, which is really important right there to talk about, is that our identity is often fused with how others perceive us. And it's really like that as a root cause of so many issues, right? Like the egoic perception that you have of yourself oftentimes is what stops you from seeing what you really are. And something I say a lot is like remembering who and what you really are, right? Getting past like the egoic perception that you have of yourself, the thing that you think you are, that you have to be, right? Or you would grow up and your parents would talk about like, remember who you are and what you represent, right? There's like all this language and importance around finding, who you are as like a career person, or as a mother, or as a group leader, or a follower of a certain sect, a religion, a political group, right? Like there's so much out there that simply speaks to like, who are you and how can we fit you into a couple of sentences so that I can digest who you are. And there's the practicality of this on a day-to-day basis, which I think is totally valid. But when it comes to the big picture, questioning your sense of identity is huge. And what I mean by this is not to look for new labels and ways to fit into something, but to actually work toward letting go of all the labels. And it sounds kind of like woo-woo and so like spiritual trendy to just be like, I'm multidimensional and I cannot be defined. But here's the thing. Embodying that as a feeling is actually incredibly practical, and it's so helpful to what I'm about to share in this whole episode. If you're wondering how does this relate to productive disagreement and to like actually handling a time when it feels like dissent is very difficult and disagreement is difficult, right? A time of censorship, a time of inauthenticity. Identity is the core piece of this, because when you feel free to take action on new things or come up with new ideas or talk about something that is not actually aligned with your own experience, when you feel free to talk about those things, basically to talk about anything, all of a sudden you're a much more expanded person. You are going to be so much better at critical thinking. You're going to be able to be friends with more types of people, to ask more interesting questions, and to basically leave at the door everything about who you think you are in order to discover something about the truth, right? In order to discover more about the person that you're speaking to or the ideas happening in our culture, right? Think about this in terms of COVID, because in the last episode we talked so much about kind of like what happened in 2020 in terms of groupthink. The whole concept of groupthink is that people become really obsessed with fitting into a group, right? And so because of that, they will sacrifice and self-censor anything that doesn't fit in with the identity of this group, right? That's a lot of times identity has to do with our membership to a social group. So when you prioritize fitting in and feeling that safety of the tribe, you are going to skip out on what is actually true for you and censor yourself. So if you are able to develop this more expanded version of who you are, then all of a sudden, like the consequences of speaking up or being authentic or sticking to your values or of participating in disagreement, those consequences are just not as scary because you have not fused who you are with the group that you're in. And of course, like, community is very important, and being, one with the people around you is so huge, and we really need that. But I think what I challenge us to think about is like how our life changes when we start on the individual level of honoring who we are and then seeing how that shift actually creates a more aligned community around you. And this is something that I shared on the Out of Our Minds Instagram, was like, we have this false sense that prioritizing harmony of the group is going to make us cohesive and like in this coherent group. But when individuals are sacrificing themselves and self-censoring, that's not true harmony, right? So that's why identity matters in this whole context, is that if you understand the fundamental nature of who you are, so many of the micro issues that we face and our inability to see and understand reality for what it is goes away, because you are not having an anxiety attack over someone or something disagreeing with you or giving you new information. This is exactly what happened in COVID, was the obsession with fitting in with the group made it so people were completely unable to take in new information, and that is when things went downhill. That's like the groupthink consequence, where we literally cannot move forward because everyone is obsessed with fitting in. So I hope that understanding this idea about identity allows you to start to break free from that. Someone who I think teaches so beautifully on identity is Alan Watts. He's my favorite writer and speaker. I've read many of his books, listened to hours of his lectures, and there's this through line about identity. And one of my favorite quotes from him is the following: "The way of liberation is a progressive disentanglement of one's self from every identification. It is to realize that I am not this body, these sensations, these feelings, these thoughts, this consciousness. The basic reality of my life is not any conceivable object." And I love that idea of disentanglement, right? The untethering. A book I need to read is The Untethered Soul, because that concept just in the title is like freaking gem. Like, that's exactly what this is all about. So that's the key here, right? The way that we liberate ourselves is to continuously, right, progressively disentangle your sense of self from all the ways that you identify. And it's that breaking free of all the 3D, right? Like the stuff that's material that we think that we are. So like the house that we live in, the job that we have, right? The one-liner that we give when we meet people about what we do, the creations that we do, right? Like, I'm a podcaster, I'm a this, I'm a that, right? The way that your family sees you, all of these ways that confine who we are, and understanding the big picture of knowing how true it is that you are this insane spark of life force energy that cannot be accurately explained in words, right? It's only something that's experienced. It's like the moment of awakening, of enlightenment, of realizing how freaking expansive and limitless we are. And the embodiment of that is where everything changes, is where all of a sudden it doesn't matter who you were yesterday or who you were 5 minutes ago. You can change and evolve and be whatever you want. And then it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, or if you have this label or that label, or you belong to this political party or not. None of that matters, because you're like, I'm actually multidimensional, and I can think and act and behave and create a reality of my choosing in that exact moment. All we have is the eternal now. That's literally all we have. And in that moment, how could you be anything defined when every way that you would describe yourself is a sentence from the past, right? Everything that you could pull from the experiences, those things happened at another time other than the eternal now. The eternal now is reinventing itself every millisecond that it is existing. And I cannot overstate the importance of that philosophical, spiritual truth with a capital fucking T. It's so important because it allows you to remember that you as a self are not threatened by other people's ideas. Okay, so this is where it leads into disagreement and being able to feel safe in who you are, even when there's new information, even when people around you do not see things the way that you do. And actually knowing that we want that experience of having kind of like that spark of anxiety from seeing new information or from learning something new from other people, because that, baby, is innovation. That's evolution. That's how we continue to learn and grow as people, as a consciousness, is by seeing other little blips of consciousness show us something different. But if every time we were to come across something new or different than what we know, and if we freak out when we see that and we shut it out, we say, no, I can't have that because it threatens my whole experience of what I think I am, we are going to devolve. We're going to lose the essence of what makes us conscious, what makes us this universal consciousness that is all one, that is connected, that is literally has matter, that was stardust, right? Like, it cannot be overstated the importance of understanding that, so that when you, in your day-to-day life, in the 3D world, in the material world, come across things that make you uncomfortable and come across new information, that we don't panic and freak out. The last point to hammer about identity here is you can still belong, right? You can still be a part of your group, your family, your friend group, the yoga class that you go to every week. You can still feel in harmony and feel the importance of community, and at the same time understand your ever evolving nature, and that not being in complete agreement or harmony with that group that you're in is okay, and it's good. And for you to be the person to lead this is huge. This is why I'm excited to talk about this, especially to you guys, to this super cool community of people, the Omis, because you guys are the ones that can take this out and really start the ripple effect. This is what I experienced in that story I shared about when I used to work at this company, and I was so nervous about my last day when they like do benedictions and tell you nice things about you, because I didn't really expect what happened, which was the summary of that story is that like people recognize the authenticity in me and my commitment to my values and what I believe. And I think it really started like almost a ripple effect of just other people witnessing that in me kind of gave them permission to do the same. And even if it's not permission, it's just like an energetic signature that we want to be putting out into the world. We want to be the people who take the first step. And that's what I want you guys to take away from it is, number one, like there's so many other people who listen to this show and who are going to hear this and be like, yeah, like I can do this. Like I can be that first step, that first spark of light that chooses to approach disagreement in a productive, positive way, right? And that chooses to free myself from all the ways that I identify with things that are actually holding me back. And know that like just by the nature of this show existing and there being hundreds of listeners, like we're not alone. It's growing. So it's just like an exciting moment to recognize like you're not alone. And even if when it seems scary, like there is a world and a collective that is building and growing of people who want to lead with light and want to expand who we are and to create a society that's full of authenticity, and that's how we run, right? So let us get into productive disagreement. So there is a book called The Art of Productive Disagreement by Buster Benson. I'm going to link it in the show notes because this book freaking changed my life. It's so powerful. It's a very fun read. It has a lot of like graphics and like little diagrams in it. And it goes through these like 8 pillars of how to be better at disagreeing. And I'm going to talk about some of the pillars here. And I want to make sure I give due credit to how much this book has taught me and just give that shout out to Buster Benson. Maybe I should have him on the podcast. Let me know. Because the book changed my life. I read this in 2020, actually. It was such perfect timing. And it completely changed the way that I interacted with the people around me, the way I interact with people at work, right? And this is why this is so helpful, because I know there's some of you guys out there that feel like you are in a situation where, maybe there's groupthink or people don't seem to be awake or whatever it is, right? They're just stuck in the victimhood mentality or in some kind of psychosis that has outsourced their power to other people. And it can be really frustrating to watch because you want to shake them awake and be like, guys, let's think for ourselves here, okay? So this book and these concepts are something that you can take into those situations, and know that from my personal experience, they really, really help and they work. So there are pillars of productive disagreement that I'm going to go over today. Most of these come from this book, and then I've added in, of course, my own sort of twists on them and experience. And I'll also link the article that talks about these 8 ways to practice the art of productive disagreement, so you can read them for yourself. Where this all starts is a concept that I like to call emotional and intellectual sovereignty. And this is tied to the practice of what Buster Benson calls noticing how anxiety sparks. And the idea with this is to essentially bring that consciousness and awareness to the way that you respond to an initial disagreement, right? Or getting new information that doesn't align with who you are, or you get into like a little tiff with your partner or a friend or a family member, and just noticing how the body gets involved with this, right? This is why we talk so much about creating that sense of self, that embodiment that then turns into you having a new operating system. So the embodiment of having that free and liberated identity then helps you to not have this anxiety spark, because you have a nervous system that can handle differences in opinion, or it can handle hardship or adversity or whatever it is. So this is the place where you see your sense of self really, really, really matters, is being able to hold emotional, intellectual sovereignty. What that means is having your own ideas and your own emotional state be dictated by you. And this is important in disagreement and also critical thinking, because basically, like, when something starts to brew and you're like, oh my God, this person disagrees with me, I can sense the tension rising. Number one, or the other good example of this is, like, if you're watching the news or like scrolling on Twitter and you get a new piece of information, is having that sovereignty over what's happening in your body, right? So like encountering new information and being able to say, okay, I'm checking in with myself, I'm staying calm, I'm breathing, right? I'm doing belly breaths. Like, you're staying in an emotionally sovereign place. Like, your emotions are yours, and you have to learn to be the captain of that ship and not let other people dictate how you respond. So when it comes to disagreement, it's noticing, hey, do I have a negative relationship to disagreement right away? Do I run away from it? Do I avoid it? Am I like anti-confrontation? These are things that we learn and we pick up on. One, because society makes us so afraid that we're going to get canceled, or there's just like no room for dissent, that we become afraid of disagreement and thinking that this other person is going to like hate us or whatever it is. And also we learn it sometimes from our family or from our parents, if they were anti-confrontational, or if we never learned how to have, discussions or disagreements with our siblings or our friends or even at school. So that initial awareness of, how do I feel when a disagreement comes up, and how can I start to change my relationship to this? And this is why the identity part, this is why the identity part is so important, and why disentangling yourself from those identifications with the objects, ideas, or groups is so key, because disagreement becomes easy as pie when you are like secure in who you are. It doesn't matter if someone disagrees or brings up a different viewpoint, because that doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect who you are on a fundamental level. And if more people had this emotional and intellectual sovereignty, and if they understood that their sense of self is not tied to their opinions, oh my God, we would have so many fewer instances where people are taking things personally and are like running away from disagreement and painting it as this horrible thing, because they feel literally in their body unsafe. Like, you are not unsafe just because someone is questioning your ideas, and you can use your discernment to understand what is a real threat. So that is the first one, is just to recap, is basically like taking that embodiment of identity and who you are as being inherently free and indefinable, and even just like that your experience doesn't need to be validated or unvalidated by someone, right? Like a lot of the time, if we're listening to a podcast or something and it's like talking about an experience that is so different from ours, or they say something that we think means that it like negates us or our experience, like honestly, I think that's impossible, because everyone's going to have a different experience, and not everyone else, it's like no one else's job to make sure that they validate your experience. And yes, in close relationships, in partnerships and family, like we can do our best to provide like that empathetic validation. But at a core level, you don't actually want to be seeking other people's validation for your experience. Like that's on you. That's your job, is to feel safe and whole enough that you don't need other people to prove that you went through something, if that makes sense. So like essentially opening yourself up to conversations that go against everything you know, this is like where you can flip it and make it fun, okay? If you're like, I'm good, I have my personal experience, I've gone through things that have made me the person I am, but you can also meet someone who looks at the world completely differently in a way that makes you feel like, wow, they have no idea what I've gone through, but also that's not their responsibility. And maybe instead of shutting that off, I just start to ask questions and I say, interesting. If they have this different experience and it's making me feel like mine's completely invalid, let me start asking more questions and get curious about their experience to learn from it. And how can both exist at the same time? This is the beauty of nuance and complexity. So many ideas and contradictions can live in the same bubble. They can live at the same time and they don't necessarily negate each other. This is the beautiful thing about the human experience, is that one person's idea and perspective doesn't always completely negate somebody else's. This ties to the emotional intellectual sovereignty because it lets you have your experience and your viewpoints and also be open to other people's. Okay, moving on. Number 2, coming up with better questions. This is what Buster Benson says. He says, ask questions that invite surprising answers. I love this because most of our questions today are just so boring and not good. And this is like, it just takes practice, right? And it doesn't have to be like super complicated either. But the point is, we want to start to ask questions. And this is like, let's say in an actual conversation or in your own like research or whatever it is. You want to ask questions that get to like the interesting part of beliefs. So one thing I learned from watching hours and hours of Joe Rogan episodes is that sometimes interesting questions, they actually can be really simple. And they just kind of are oriented toward like digging deeper. So if you've watched any of Joe Rogan's episodes, a lot of times he'll just say like, how so? Or like, why is that, to the person he's talking to get further into their thinking, or like asking, like, how did you arrive at this conclusion? Or like, what makes you think that? Or like, why is this? Right. So those are simple, but the point is like, sometimes it's just letting the other person continue to speak and share their perspective and you simply pulling back layers, right? So someone shares like a story and or let's say they share a belief and continuing to say like, why or how so? And the nuance here is like, your motive here should be one of curiosity and understanding. And again, this is why I think it's so important to address like the identity piece and like your sense of self, because that's where you fix sort of like the unintentional like tone issues almost, where you're talking to someone and you're like, that you feel like they're questioning you, but it's not from a place of wanting to understand. They like want to like expose you or something. So my point here being, when you're asking these things, it also doesn't hurt to give those like safety statements. This is something I've heard Lindsay Simsick from Almost 30 talks about, is like these security statements where you can say like, I'm asking this because I'm really curious and I want to understand better, right? Great statement to say, level the playing field. You don't make people feel like you're like investigating them or like trying to like do the freaking Spanish Inquisition on them. Is you're just like, I'm asking all this because I actually want to understand better, because this isn't my perspective, but I want to know yours better. And this is where you come up with the good questions, is where you dig deeper and you get to the why. on top of this, when you ask good questions like this, a lot of the times it actually helps the person you're talking to spot their own blind spots and to like basically show where there's holes in their thinking. So it will become apparent to both you and the person you're speaking to when things are like not adding up or not making sense, or maybe they just like adopted this from somewhere else, which again, maybe that's fine, but you're getting more information and more data points that relate to the conversation. And the other thing to note here is, again, like curiosity and understanding as the reason why you're disagreeing in the first place is so huge, because sometimes these conversations just go sideways when we're actually going into it just waiting to make our point, or we're like waiting to disprove what this person is saying. And that's not genuine. That's not like I think a good core reason to be engaging in disagreement. Like the whole point here is we're rewriting what it means to disagree and to view this as a good thing that we want to be doing. We want to understand, we want to see this other person's viewpoint, and we're even willing to be wrong. We're willing to be completely proven wrong from our viewpoint because we're working on this together. Which brings me to my next point. Working together. You can become the leader here. A lot of these tips and tactics are ones where you are going to kind of assume the seat of bringing a lot of consciousness to these conversations, and it's not always going to be reciprocated. Like sometimes we're the ones who are putting a lot of like love and light and good energy into a conversation, and it's not reciprocated. Nonetheless, this is where you get to be the leader. This is where you guys, like the Om community, the Omis, you can choose to be the kind of people that quote unquote take the higher road, like are doing the work of bringing the light into these conversations where normally things would be like dark and aggressive, or people will be afraid. So you can offer up a new way of having this discussion. Something that Nikki and I have said a few times on past episodes about relationships is it doesn't have to always be me versus you, or like my idea versus your idea, my opinion versus yours. It can be me and you versus the problem or versus the idea. And so when you do this, it becomes so much lighter, because you see what you've done there is you've removed the identity from the issues or from the topic. It's no longer like I'm arguing with you because you have this idea and that means something about you. Suddenly it's actually realizing that you are not your ideas and your opinions. So let's just talk about the ideas and opinions almost like in a silo where we can work with them together. So it's like simple ways of saying, okay, this is an interesting idea. Can we talk about it further? Or not being like, so what you are saying is, right? It's like become aware of all the language that normally gets into these discussions where we're tying the person to their ideas, and by doing that, they also feel threatened. So take the idea out of the person and just look at it on the table plainly. I like something that Buster Benson says, which is that your opponent can see your blind spots better than you can, which is something to always remember, is like even inviting in people to poke holes and to lift up or to show you where the blind spots are. And this is like that constant reminder that there's always something to learn from other people. And you can see this as an opportunity, like, okay, this person disagrees with me. Amazing. They can start to point out my blind spots, and I can, again, not take that personally and use it as a way to deepen my understanding or to even be proved wrong, which would be cool because I would love to learn the truth, right? Like we want to understand things better and just expand the way that we look at the world. So working together on the problem is a really great way to take the tension and like the drama out of disagreements, is to look at it as the two of you understanding these issues. And again, it's something that you will probably lead. You will probably lead this in the conversations, because not everybody knows how to do this, clearly, because as a society, we freaking suck at disagreeing. And it's something that you can bring into it and like come up with fun ideas of how to add statements, like those security statements I mentioned, to do this better. Of like, okay, let's imagine that like I'm the one who thinks XYZ. So like let's switch opinions. Like, what about this? Or what information would prove this wrong, right? Like really get innovative with how you approach it, and just try to depart from the past ways that you would have a conversation about something. So it's like, okay, I currently hold the belief that XYZ, but what if we flipped places? Like, how would you prove this wrong, or how would you prove this right? Okay. Another really practical thing that you can do, which also shows you where this other person is in terms of like their willingness to talk about things, is you can say things like, what evidence would you need to see to change your mind? And if you get an answer like nothing, like I won't change my mind, you also should know that, because that can help you dictate like, okay, are we even having a conversation here, or do you just want to tell me how you feel? Which, if that's the latter is the case, then great, good to know. This is something I also pulled from another really great book called How to Have Impossible Conversations. I'll also link this in the description. This book is like super, super practical. It literally just like lists out all these tactics on how to have conversations that feel really, really difficult, impossible conversations. And one of those things is like saying those statements of like, okay, like in order, like what evidence do you need to see to be proved wrong? Or like what would need to be true in order for you to see XYZ, right? So it's like, is this person even interested in having a discussion, having their mind changed? If the answer is no, okay, either one, end of conversation, or number two, you switch to just simply trying to understand them because it is helpful and you want to like see their point more, right? And maybe through trying to understand them and asking those questions that dig deeper into the layers, then all of a sudden like their thinking is exposed to themselves or to you, and then you have more information, right? So that's kind of like where you can take the working together thing and also getting a better understanding of like, what is the goal here? Are you actually interested in understanding, or do you just want to be heard and validated, which is also can be a valid experience. Next, neutrality, even with threatening ideas. So this ties back to the identity piece, because if you can talk about things without endorsing them, then suddenly you're going to be able to discuss so many more ideas because you're not afraid of them. And this is one of my favorite parts of the book from Buster Benson, the Productive Disagreement book, is how he explained being able to discuss things without endorsing them. And this is huge because especially today, it's like the whole root of like cancel culture and censorship and self-censorship is that we're just afraid of being able to discuss ideas because people have this fear that if you bring them to the light, that all of a sudden like either more people will adopt them, or like all of a sudden you're making it, you're condoning it, which yeah, maybe in some scenarios, but honestly, the cost of not talking about things and being a society that censors is so much worse than the outcome of talking about things and having discussions. And there's actually been like examples and like events and almost like research done on this where they'll like host, these talks or like these get-togethers where they talk about like really intense topics. Like there's, certain countries or like groups that condone abusing women for like certain things, right? Like there's certain cultures that think it's okay to like stone women if they do some like sin, right? And so they'll have these events where they bring those people who like lead those cultures or whatever like that group is that thinks that is okay with doing that, and they have open conversations about it. And when they do that, it ends up being so much more productive, and people actually end up changing their minds and are more willing to evolve because they were heard out, right? Like you give the person who has the problematic idea the ability to speak about it, and oftentimes letting that wall come down is what creates the ability for things to change. And just to be honest, like so many of the problems, let's say just in the West, that we're like afraid to talk about, it's like the people who are deciding what we're allowed to speak about and what is unacceptable. Like the bar is so low for what we think is an acceptable idea and what is not. And that is happening because we have this fear of disagreement, and we have this fear that if we speak about this idea, then we're endorsing it. And it just couldn't be further from the truth. Like when you allow the dynamic discussions to happen and we view disagreement as the starting place, we end up coming home with better ideas and with our thinking being evolved. And that's the whole point, is like creating that neutrality, and you being like the leader of this movement, let's say, of like this discussion, or, you know, whatever, whoever you're with, is cultivating that neutrality allows you to show people that you can discuss the idea without endorsing it. And then from that identity perspective is like, you're so much more open and willing to take on new ideas. And just imagine, like, again, in COVID, if more people were willing to depart from their group identity or from whatever opinion they had arrived at and to take on new information, things would have been so different. Like, if productive disagreement was the norm and that was like what we were shown on TV and on the news, things would be so different because we would have allowed the ideas to come through, right? Which clearly did not happen. So, but it can change, right? This is why I'm talking about this, is because it starts at the micro level with the individual who chooses to embrace it and lead by example and lead by just creating that new reality of what disagreement could look like. So yeah, this point just again is like, it's so important in this cancel culture sort of society that we're living in, is cultivating that ability to show what it looks like to endorse those ideas, to talk about those ideas without endorsing them. Someone who's a really, really, really good at this and whose work I really admire is Africa Brooke. She is the queen of talking about self-censorship and self-sabotage, both on the individual level and the collective. And her work is really all about, and is in part about, showing that we should be able to have our most ridiculous, our most unacceptable ideas put out onto the table so that we can speak about them. And that by doing that, we are eliminating this like sabotage that the culture does to itself of being afraid to speak about things. And through the discussion, we arrive at the better ideas. Like, the only way to see which idea is best, actually let the ideas battle it out, right? The people aren't battling it out, the ideas are. And the final one, and this is another one straight from Buster Benson and the Art of Productive Disagreement, is to accept reality, then participate in it. This idea is so inherently spiritual that I love it. Okay, this is why I think you guys are really going to resonate with this one, because it perfectly ties to what we talked about in the last episode of understanding that, yes, there is darkness in the world. There probably always will be because of the nature of reality and duality. And the idea of accepting darkness is that basically, or accepting reality, is that basically, like, when you deny that the thing exists, we don't actually get anywhere. It's like the sweeping under the rug. Like, it's still there under the rug, just festering, right? So when we let things just simmer under the surface or in the darkness, right, we miss out on the opportunity to learn from those things and to actually like let the idea evolve and be seen. And I think, again, people get so scared to talk about those things because they think it means something about who they are and what they do. So again, like, I just can't overstate the tie-in of identity here, because we've become so over-identified with our ideas that we're afraid, right? So I think you guys get that point. But in terms of accepting reality and participating in it, the other thing that Buster Benson says, which I think is so perfect, is we can learn to accept that problems exist so that we can participate in their solutions. That's the key there, right? Is like, if you are someone who thinks that there's like this idea that is very problematic, then actually by like accepting it and recognizing it and letting it be out on the table, then you can actually participate in the solution, right? Instead of just shunning it and letting it be in the dark corner. Instead of that, by addressing it and becoming aware of it and accepting it, all of a sudden it's become neutral, right? That's where you create that neutral space to talk about it. And then you can actually be part of the solution. And so let's say, you know, again, COVID is such a good example. And just like that 2020 era of like hypertension, just like, you know what I mean? Like, so much aggression and tension in the culture that people were afraid of the opposing viewpoint. So But if people just were to say, okay, let's accept that there's this opposing viewpoint, there's these people who think very differently about how we should approach the solution, or they aren't sure, if this is really right, or should we be doing these mandates, whatever it is, right? If we were like, hey, come and tell us about that, okay? I don't like this. It's freaking me out. It's making me feel unsafe, but I think we should probably hear this out. If we do that, then the person who's standing on the quote unquote other side then gets to participate in the solution, which will become more innovative and better for everyone if we bring in the opposing idea. So it goes both ways. Like whatever opinions that there are on one topic, right? Two sides of a coin, for example, both sides benefit from hearing from the other, because that's how we get all of the information instead of only showing what we think is right, because it validates us and our ego and our sense of self and our group identity. Like, you see how this is a massive problem, is tying yourself to the ideas and the groups that satiate that side of you that's like, yeah, those people agree with me, so I just only want to hang out with them. Like, guys, this is not it. And if we want to build a new society and like tap into this new collective energy of high levels of consciousness and love and light, like, this is where we invite in everyone and we say, we're not just about our ideas and our cool opinions that we think are correct. We actually want to hear all the other ones. And I think that is so key. That's what we forget, is like the spiritual ego kind of comes in and we actually put ourselves into a new group where we're like, oh, we're better because we're more conscious and we're more awake. And it's like, that is so inherently unspiritual, because you are, again, putting yourself into a box and differentiating yourself from other people. And that's not the point. Point is to embrace the nuance and the perspectives all around us, because that's how we move forward as a society. Yeah, so the kind of final point about the disagreement stuff, and then I want to answer this really great question that we got, is just kind of like trying to update your own perspective on the act of disagreement itself. And this is really where it all changes, and where you become the person who changes other people's approach to disagreement. So, when you do that inner work of expanding your nervous system capacity and exposing yourself to all sorts of different ideas, to reading and learning from people who you disagree with, right? And just having that sense of self that is very liberated and expansive, then all of a sudden, like, I guarantee you're going to start to look forward to those opportunities to disagree and to see what you can learn from other people. And it's just that this is like the difference between staying in the comfort zone and leaving the comfort zone. It's like when you are willing to leave the comfort zone, you're like, wait, there's all this cool stuff out here. Like, I get to learn and I get to see this person's whole life experience is so different, and him and I are never going to be on the same page, but that's kind of cool, because then we get to have all these different pages and make a cool book because we have different perspectives. And it's just something that I know it comes naturally to some people more than others. I would say for me, for the human design nerds out there, I'm a generator 1-4. The 1 is my like internal personality per se, and that's of the researcher. So I have so much genuine curiosity in me. Like I really find it natural to me to just want to learn more things. And then the 4 is a people person. So basically like the interest of loving being with people, and also just being, I think, generally intrigued by like humans and how humans operate. So the two of them coming together, I think, has helped me be someone who loves to learn from other people and then also teach people other things. So that, for one, is just to say, like, yes, I think you could argue some people are more naturally like open to this idea of disagreement and curiosity, but I also think it can be practiced and learned, because so much of it has to do with your nervous system capacity and your identity and your sense of self, and like your willingness to go out there and just learn and be proven wrong, right? And it's so good for us. It's so worth it. Like, it's just incredible to see the ideas and the really cool shit that comes out of spaces where we let people ask questions. Really, that's it. So, okay, now I want to answer this question from Miles. This was a question that was sparked by last week's episode, which is episode number 10 on navigating darkness, because we talked really all about like really just what happens in fear-based societies, and like when we let ourselves be driven by division and groupthink, and like what to do also in the future, just even in present day, like when we are encountering darkness or when things start to happen that are like freaking us out and we don't like. And I don't know if that's the right way to explain it, but basically like what to do when it feels like there's another round of something coming. Like that was last week's episode, is basically just like how do we change our approach? So the question was, how do we navigate, especially within entire industries where so many people still lack that quote unquote awake, are still sit within indoctrination of fear and obedience, right? Still remain comfortably lost in psychosis. How do we navigate that, especially when choice or diverse views get you so quickly canceled and blacklisted? So I think what this question is getting at is like, how do we navigate that darkness when you find yourself in an industry or in a group or whatever it is where there's so many people that are operating in fear and blind obedience? There's a couple things I want to say here. One is just recognizing how hard this is, because I know, like I think specifically what this person is getting at. I also personally worked in an industry. I lived in LA, and when I worked there, like I was in an industry that was definitely one that was just like blindly following all the mainstream media stuff and was just like not questioning anything, and it was really scary and frustrating. And for one, I would say you would be surprised what you can achieve by bringing your perspective in a conscious way, like bringing up your perspective in a way that is very, very intentional, and basically taking like everything I just said about disagreement, and like the way that I navigated this was essentially like being willing to take that first step and initiate conversations that need to be had. And like obviously everyone's situation is different, so it's hard to know exactly what's going on, but what I did in these situations was, first of all, I asked myself, like, can I actually make a change here on this individual level, right? Like, what is the status of this group? Where is their thinking at? You know, who is the person I'm dealing with? Like, where are my efforts going to go the furthest? And this is important because it can be like, you know, it's easy to say like, just speak up and, you know, try to make a difference where you can. But sometimes the place you're in, you're not actually going to be able to make that much change. And I'm not saying that as like a defeatist perspective. It's more like a strategic, smart move, is to seriously think about like, where are your efforts going to make the biggest impact, and where do you, as either like a leader or an individual contributor, have the capacity and the ability to make a change. So like for me in my job, that looked like, you know, I guess just to give a pretty specific example, like I was a producer sometimes on sets, and because of that, I was in charge of having to like hold up like certain rules, and then like they would tell me what I was supposed to do for XYZ to happen on set. And if I basically like felt and knew deep down that these things were incorrect, then I was the person in charge, so I was going to create like the reality of that set. And it's like tough to answer because it's so specific, but I guess what I wanted, okay, this is what I want you to take away from this. Use your discernment and your intellect and your intuition to figure out where it is best for you to use your efforts. Because honestly, there are some places and some times when your incredible high level of consciousness and love and light and all this good stuff is not even ready to be received. And those are the decisions where you have to decide to either take your efforts somewhere else or make that decision of like the opportunity cost, right? Of like, is this the place where I know it's not going to be fully aligned with my values, but this is important for me in my life stage? Like those are the practical decisions that a lot of us have to make today, and that we made, especially in the thick of like pandemic life, I guess, was deciding the times and places that make the most sense for you to put the effort in to make change. And sometimes the change just starts within us, and that's the most that we can do. And we can't always dictate what people around us are doing. So that's one aspect of this. And the other is you have to kind of make that decision of like, how important is it to you to have this aspect be aligned in your life, right? So like maybe it's okay that you're in an industry where a lot of people are operating in fear and groupthink and tribalism, and it's okay because that's just your work and you can like kind of separate yourself from that, right? Like that's the identity piece, is maybe it's okay. It doesn't have to be that just because the place that you work isn't fully aligned with who you are. Maybe that's not the key right now for you. Maybe right now you need to work and you need to be in this industry and it's fulfilling for you in a lot of ways, and it's not perfect, but that's okay. And that's the reality. Like you have to sometimes accept that that's a reality. Or maybe it feels right for you to make a leap and to change something and to leave, right? And to not put your time and energy into places that don't feel aligned for you. These are personal decisions that you have to make. And speaking from my experience, I was definitely very happy that I stayed in the industry, in the job that I was in for however long it was, like a year, a little less than a year and a half. And that I really made a valiant effort to try to like bring in the new ideas, to try to do things differently, to create reality as best as I could from a personal like empowerment perspective and making decisions when I was like a leader in certain scenarios. I'm glad I really put the effort in to do that. And I also knew at some point that it was time for me to leave. And it was time for me to figure something else out and to take a leap of faith and to go somewhere else and to do my own thing, because I had made a decision that at some point I was like, I need to align my daily life, my career, my work, and all the things I put my time and energy into like who I am. Like it needed to be aligned to my soul. So that's the truth, honestly, is I think sometimes life gives us those situations so that we can learn to take the leap of faith and to trust in the universe and to trust that the net is going to appear when we take a leap, even if it looks like it's not there. And that's kind of the two sides of this, is like sometimes it's okay to make those practical decisions of you got to eat, you got to take care of yourself, you got to pay the bills, you got to do all these things that we have to do in the 3D world. Like you just got to do it. But then also some days you're like, maybe it's time to take a leap. Maybe it's time to put myself out there and to say, you know what? This is who I am. This is my belief. This is my decision that I've made about me. And if there's a repercussion of getting canceled or blacklisted, maybe that's your path. And I'm just saying this in words and advice, so it's going to sound so much easier and like so much more like cool than it will in real life. But sometimes that's how it goes. Like people have to make those decisions of, you know, what's your life going to look like? Like, are you going to listen to that calling and trust it? And that's on you. That's what you have to decide. That's how you have to decide how you're going to handle the darkness, handle whatever you're facing. That's the real shit of life. And I think I definitely look back at myself, and I know other people who have made the more dramatic decision per se to really trust themselves and to take a step that feels so scary and uncertain, but is aligned with who they are, and to know that the universe is going to have your fucking back. I promise. Even when it seems like it doesn't, it will, because that's the world that we're living in. Things are becoming lighter. You'll be able to manifest faster. Like there's all this things changing in the collective that I think are really in support of people trusting deep down what it is that's right for them. It's not going to be easy. It could result in real consequences, but maybe that's the soul path that you're on, right? Like maybe the getting canceled is what allows you to be liberated and to experience an aligned and abundant life like you never thought before. Countless people talk about how they got canceled or blacklisted or fired or whatever, ended up being the best thing for them because they ended up having to go down their own path and figure out what to do, right? Again, that's your decision. So yeah, just want to be clear. Like, I don't know. There's honestly nothing to be clear about. It's really just, it's hard. And I think it's worth recognizing that, but this is the cool kind of thing about life and this journey is everybody has their personal legend. I just finished The Alchemist, and it's like such a reminder about this intricate, crazy journey that we're all on, and that like there's going to be the hard parts where you feel like you've lost it all and you have nothing and you're like fighting for survival. But if you're following your heart and your soul, I really don't think you can go wrong. And I stand firmly on that answer, because I think that's what this new earth is all about. What the new paradigm is about is to just follow your fucking heart and soul and trust that the universe has your back. And that's it. So yeah, I hope that helps answer your question. I know it's a difficult one. I can imagine, how difficult that can be, especially in certain industries where the consequences are real as fuck. So trust me, I get it. But yeah, that's kind of it. That's kind of the wisdom I got for you on that one. And, the disagreement stuff is key. Like being that leader who can instill change, or at least try to, is huge. And then if your efforts aren't working, it's time to take them somewhere else where it does make a difference. So that's it. Oh my God. Can't believe I just did that for an hour by myself. That was cool. So yeah, I'll wrap it up here, but thank you guys so much for listening. I really, really hope that you found this helpful. Please let me know what you liked, what were your biggest takeaways. And obviously, send me any questions you have. I could totally do a part 2 or just answer some stuff on stories, whatever you guys want. So yeah, thank you guys for listening. You guys are the fucking best. It has been such a joy to talk to you guys every week and hear from you, etc., etc. So yeah, I will leave you with that, and I thank you for your time, and I will talk to you next time. Goodbye.